The thing that still bugs me isn't what I saw. It's that if I'd been on my break, nobody would have caught it. I worked night audit for the Metro's video ops team back then. If you've ever ridden WMATA and looked up at those little half-globe cameras on the platform ceilings, that's what I stared at all night. A wall of monitors, 16 at a time, cycling through hundreds of feeds. Green line, red line, blue, silver, all of them. My job was to sit there and watch tile. The shift was 9 to 7. In January 2022, the trains stopped running around 11:30, and the last cleaning crews were out by 2. After that, the platforms just sat empty for a few hours. That was when things got quiet in the booth, when you could actually drink your coffee and listen to the HVAC and try not to fall asleep in a chair that squeaked every time you leaned back. My shift lead was a guy named Vernon. Older, been there since the 90s, never raised his voice at anybody. He'd taught me a trick of setting up rotation cycles, so no camera went unwatched for more than about 4 minutes. He said the way to stay awake was to give yourself a job for every minute. Otherwise you'd zone out, and the whole night would just melt. It was a Tuesday, or early Wednesday, depending how you count it. Around 2:40 in the morning, cold outside. The kind of DC cold that isn't dramatic, just miserable, wet and gray. I remember because I'd walked in with my coat still damp, and it was hanging on the back of my chair. I was cycling through the Green Line station south of the mall. Waterfront came up on monitor 4. There were people on the platform. My first read wasn't fear, it was annoyance, because it meant paperwork. Homeless folks did sometimes slip past the last train sweep. So did drunk kids from the bars on 8th. You logged it, you called the station manager on duty, they radioed a cleaner or a transit cop, and everybody went home. But this was 6 people, and they weren't lying down, they weren't stumbling. They were standing in a loose line along the edge of the platform, on the outbound side, with their backs mostly to the tracks. 2 of them were kneeling. I zoomed monitor 4 in. They had tools. I want to be careful about how I described this, because at the time I didn't know what I was looking at. What I could see was that the 2 kneeling ones had opened a section of the cable channel that runs along the base of the platform wall. You've probably never noticed the channel because you're not supposed to. It's just a long metal cover, painted the same off-white as everything else. They had the cover off. It was leaning against the wall next to them. One of them had a spool of something in his lap. The other was doing something with his hands that I couldn't fully make out. The resolution wasn't good enough, but the movement was small, precise, the kind of movement you make when you're threading something. The other 4 were standing. 2 of them were on lookout, one at each end of the platform. I could tell because they weren't doing anything. They were just watching the tunnel mouths. The third was holding a bag, one of those black canvas ones like a plumber would carry. The 4th was doing the thing that made me put my coffee down. He was looking at the cameras, not glancing, not sweeping his eyes across the ceiling the way a nervous person might. He was standing in the middle of the platform with his head tilted back, and he was going through each camera one at a time. I watched him find the one I was looking through. He held on it for maybe 3 seconds. Then he moved his head a couple of degrees and found the next one, then the next. He knew where they all were, every single one. I sat forward and just watched for maybe 20 seconds. I needed to be sure of what I was seeing. Every training I'd ever had said verify before you escalate, because false alarms clog the radio and make everyone slower next time. So I verified. 6 people, post-service hours, working on the cable channel with the cover off, 1 counting cameras, all of them dressed plain, dark clothes, nothing high vis, nothing that suggested a contractor, no hard hats, no vests. Metro contractors always wear the vests, even at 3 in the morning with nobody around, because that's just what you do when you work near a rail. They were not contractors. I picked up the desk phone and called Vernon on the internal line. He was in the next room over. I told him what I had. I kept my voice low, even though there was no reason to. It's not like they could hear me. He was over in about 40 seconds. I heard him sit down in the chair beside me before I saw him. He watched for maybe 10 seconds. Then he said, "Call MTPD, now." MTPD is Metro Transit Police. I dialed. I told the dispatcher what I was looking at, gave her the station, gave her the platform side, told her 6 people, tools, cable channel open, 1 watching cameras. She didn't ask me any questions except how long they'd been there. I said I didn't know, I'd just come to this feed. She said units were rolling. While we waited, Vernon did a smart thing. He didn't touch the feed I was on. He pulled the recording from monitor 4 back 30 minutes on a second screen and started scrubbing. He wanted to see how they got in. They came up from the tracks, not through the fare gates, not down the escalators, from the tunnel. On the recording, you could see them walk out of the dark of the northbound tunnel, single file, unhurried, like they'd done that walk before. The guy with the bag came last and set it down first. Nobody spoke on the recording as far as we could tell, but the platform mics are trash, so I wouldn't put money on that. Back on the live feed, the one who'd been counting cameras had stopped counting. He was standing very still, looking at the northbound tunnel mouth. Then he said something over his shoulder to the kneeling 2. I watched them start putting things back into the bag. Not panicked, not dropping things, just picking up. They knew the cops were coming. I don't know how they knew. Maybe one of the lookouts caught the flash of headlights topside, through the vents. I've heard the old-timers say you can sometimes see that from the platform if you know where to look. Maybe they had somebody outside on a radio. Maybe they just had a timer. Whatever it was, they knew. But they didn't leave in time. MTPD came in from both ends of the platform at once, from the mezzanine stairs and up through the emergency exit at the far end. 6 officers at least, maybe 8. It was hard to count because everyone was moving fast. I watched 2 of the 6 on the platform put their hands up almost immediately. One of the kneeling ones tried to stand and slipped on his own tools and went down on a knee. The one who'd been counting cameras just stood there with his hands out to the sides, like he'd been rehearsing that exact pose. Nobody ran. That was the strange part. On camera, it looked almost polite. They were all cuffed and walked out through the mezzanine. The bag went with an officer separately. The section of cable channel stayed open, with whatever they'd been doing to it left exposed. Within about 10 minutes, there were people on that platform who did not look like transit cops. Suits, one guy in a windbreaker with no logo on it, a woman with a hard case. They took photos of the open channel before anyone touched it. Vernon and I gave statements that morning before we went home. I typed mine on the same computer I'd been watching the feeds on. It felt weirdly small on the screen after everything. Nobody told us what they'd been installing. I asked my supervisor 2 days later, and she said it was above her. I asked Vernon a week after that, and he shook his head and said, "You did the right thing. Don't chase it." A guy from another agency came in and interviewed me a second time. More careful questions, wanting to know exactly when I'd first noticed, exactly where I'd been looking before, whether I recognized any of the faces on the recording. I didn't. He didn't tell me anything either. What I know, because Vernon told me, and Vernon doesn't lie, is that after that night, they ran a full sweep of the cable infrastructure along the Green Line, and then along the rest of the system. It took weeks. He said they found more than one thing. He wouldn't say more than that. I worked another 8 months in that booth. I never saw those 6 again on any feed. I did notice, over that spring, that the camera coverage in the platform ceilings changed. Different housings, more of them. I don't think that was a coincidence. I still ride the metro. I use the Green Line sometimes when I'm going to a game, and every so often, when I'm standing on a platform waiting for a train, I catch myself looking at the little metal strip along the base of the wall, the one nobody's supposed to notice, and thinking about the man who counted the cameras. He knew exactly where every one of them was. He looked right at me through mine, and whatever he and his friends were putting in that wall, somebody, somewhere, thought it was worth walking a mile through a live rail tunnel in the middle of the night to get it there. The thing about winter at a polar station is that you stop trusting your own boredom. Boredom is what makes you look at the same graph 40 nights in a row and finally notice something you should have caught the first week. This was July 2021, deep in the Antarctic winter, at a small atmospheric research site I'm not going to name because it's still active, and I still like the people there. 4 of us plus me, everyone else asleep by 10. I had the graveyard shift because I'd volunteered for it back in April, and never bothered to hand it back. You get used to being awake when the sun hasn't been up for a month, and I like the quiet. My job was simple on paper. Watch the gas analyzers, watch the pressure sensors, watch the tower feed, log anything that spiked, methane, CO2, water vapor, a few trace things. If a number jumped, I'd write it down, note the wind, note the time, and go back to my tea. Most nights, the biggest event was the coffee machine finishing its cycle, or Merrick's snoring finally settling into the slow rhythm that meant he'd rolled onto his side. The first time I caught it, I wasn't even looking at the screen. I'd stood up to stretch and glanced sideways at the methane trace. There was a small bump. Not alarming. Methane does weird things around ice, and we're on ice, and half the continent farts once in a while when the pressure changes. I sat back down, noted it, moved on. Then the same bump happened the next night, around the same time. I noticed because I was making tea again, and I'm a creature of habit. The third night, I set an alarm on my phone for 2:40 a.m. and waited. At 2:47, the methane trace lifted. Not a spike, more of a lean. It climbed for about 6 minutes, held, and then slid back down to background. CO2 nudged with it. The isotope ratio on the CH4 channel drifted heavy for the same window. Wind was low, temperature was steady. Nothing outside the station had changed that I could see. I told a colleague named Priya about it at breakfast. She was elbow deep in a bowl of powdered eggs and she barely looked up. She said sensor drift, probably a valve, and asked me to swap the intake line. I did. Same result that night, same result the next. I swapped analyzers. I recalibrated. I ran a leak test on the whole rack. Priya came in and ran it again herself because she didn't trust me to do it right, which is fair. She's better at it than I am. Nothing on our end. By the end of the second week, I had 11 nights of data, 11 leans in the trace, all inside a 20-minute window centered on 2:51 a.m. local. Every one of them the same shape. The kind of consistency you never get with weather. Weather is noisy. This wasn't. I brought it to the station lead, a Norwegian guy we called Ivar. Ivar is one of those people who listens to you with his whole face and then takes 8 seconds before he answers. He looked at my plots. He asked how sure I was about the calibration. He asked if I'd checked the generator exhaust cycle. I had. He said, "Keep taking data. Don't lose sleep over it." Which was funny because I was already not sleeping. The next thing I did was the thing I probably shouldn't have done alone at 3 in the morning, but I did it anyway. I tried to source it. We have 2 auxiliary sniffers about 800 meters from the main mast, part of a different project, older gear. I pulled their logs. The lean showed up there too, but slightly offset. A few seconds earlier at the eastern one, a few seconds later at the western one. That gave me a rough vector. I ran it through the wind field for that hour. I drew a line back from the mast against the mean flow, plotted it on the survey map we keep tacked to the wall behind the coffee machine. The line ran almost due south from the station. About 4.5 kilometers out, it crossed a small feature marked on the map with a pencil circle from someone else's project, years back. The circle was labeled with initials I didn't recognize and the word anomaly and a question mark. I stood at that map for a long time. The station makes a lot of small sounds at night. The heaters click. The vent above the door hums at a pitch that gets under your teeth if you listen to it too long. Merrick's snoring came through 2 doors. That night, I remember hearing all of it very clearly, and also not hearing any of it, if that makes sense. The point on the map was under the ice, roughly 900 meters of ice, based on the radar survey from 3 seasons prior. I want to be clear about something. I'm a climate scientist. I work with atmosphere. I don't, as a rule, get spooked by numbers. Numbers are the friendliest thing in my life, but there's a specific feeling you get when a data set starts behaving like it has intent. And I had that feeling standing in front of that map at 3:20 in the morning, in my socks, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour earlier. I went back to the console and I checked the timestamps one more time. 2:47 to about 2:56 every night, within a 2-minute jitter. I checked our clock sync against GPS. Clean. I checked whether anything in the station cycled on a schedule that could match. Nothing did. The heaters are demand-driven. The generator runs continuous. The satellite uplink pings at even hours. The next morning, I wrote it up properly. Coordinates, vector math, the isotope shift, the timing. I sent it to the program office in Cambridge and copied Ivar. I kept my language flat. I didn't use the word anomaly. I said recurrent localized enhancement and let the numbers speak for themselves. Cambridge came back within a day. They wanted the raw files. I sent them. They wanted the sniffer logs. I sent those too. Somebody there ran a check I hadn't thought of, cross-referencing the seismic array from a partner station a few hundred kilometers away. There was nothing on it during our window. No tremor, no shift, nothing. The word drilling came up on a call about 10 days later. Not from me, from a glaciologist at the program office named Ellen, who said in that polite British way that isn't really a question, "We should probably look at this properly, don't you think?" I said yes. Ivar said yes. It went up the chain and then it went quiet for a while, the way anything expensive does. 3 months later, in October, a small team came in on the resupply and set up a hot water drill at the coordinates. I watched from the station through the good binoculars when the weather allowed. Most days it was just a small, dark shape against the flat white, and a wisp of steam that got torn sideways by the wind. It took them about 11 days to punch through. What they found was, in the professional sense, a real result. A pocket of geothermal activity. Small, but genuine. Warm water venting into a cavity under the ice, dissolving gases from the bedrock, and those gases were finding their way up through microfractures and out through the fern to our sniffers. The isotope signature matched a deep source. It was, everyone agreed, an unusual location for that kind of thing. The paper came out the following year. I'm on it, somewhere in the middle of the author list. It's not classified if anyone wants to look it up. There's no mystery in it. Here is what is in the paper: the source of the gas, the composition, the estimated flux, the likely mechanism, the suggested implications for how we model methane budgets in East Antarctic ice. Here is what is not in the paper. Geothermal systems don't keep a schedule. They breathe on their own time. The vent we found could plausibly pulse, sure. Pressure builds, pressure releases, that's fine. But not on a 9-minute window centered on the same local time every single night for at least 14 weeks of data before drilling. And, I later checked, for the entire archived record from the auxiliary sniffers going back 3 years. Every night, same window. Down to a jitter of about 2 minutes across a 3-year baseline. Ellen and I talked about it once, on a video call, after the paper was accepted. She was in her office in Cambridge, and I was back home by then, on a couch, in July again, but the northern one. I asked her what she thought about the timing. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "We wrote what we could support." I said I understood. She said, "If you find the rest of it, let me know." I told her I would. I haven't. I don't know that I'll try. I still get the raw data pushed to me every quarter, out of habit more than anything. I open it sometimes when I can't sleep. The window has moved by about 4 minutes over the last 2 years, drifting slowly earlier. Everything else is exactly the same. The alert didn't even wake me up. I was already awake, watching the same 3 dashboards I watch every night, when the query monitor flashed yellow at 2:47 in the morning. I work night shift for the Department of Social Services in Richmond. Been on nights for about 4 years now. The building sits off Broad Street, one of those beige government blocks that looks like it was designed to be forgotten. 3rd floor is where our team lives. Ceiling tiles the color of wet paper, carpet worn through in a path from the elevator to the break room. On a normal Tuesday, I'm the only person in the whole wing after 11, unless a janitor comes through with a cart. My job, mostly, is boring. Watch systems, restart what needs restarting, handle the occasional call from a caseworker in another time zone who forgot their password. That's it. The most exciting thing that happened all of 2022 was when a squirrel got into the HVAC and killed the AC on the second floor. I'd been drinking the same brand of gas station coffee for so long I couldn't taste it anymore. That night I had a cold one in a thermos and half a leftover sandwich from a place on Grace Street that stays open till 2. So when the yellow flashed, I didn't panic. Yellow just means query volume is above baseline. It happens. Sometimes a batch job runs long. Sometimes a caseworker in another office runs a big report before going home. I clicked into the log to see who was hitting the recipient database, expecting a service account or a nightly ETL job. The account name I saw belonged to a person, Kevin. That was the display name attached to it. I don't want to write the whole login string here, and it doesn't matter now anyway. First thing I thought was, okay, somebody's working late. Some caseworker got a bug up their ass and decided to catch up on files. Fine. Except the query rate was wrong. Human beings don't hit a database like that. You pull a record, you look at it, you scroll, you type notes, you move on. Even a fast worker takes 10-15 seconds between queries. This account was pulling records at 40 per second and holding steady. I sat forward. I've watched enough late-night activity to know what people look like on a system. People are messy. They open something, they leave it, they come back. They mistype searches, they pause to answer a text. What I was looking at had none of that. It was pulling records sequentially by ID number, starting low, climbing, every field, social security number, address, banking info for direct deposit, dependents, income verification, all of it, top to bottom, like somebody was reading a book by tearing the pages out. I opened the session details. The connection was coming from inside the network, an internal IP on the caseworker VLAN, not a VPN session, not a remote login. Somewhere in the building, or on our internal wireless, a machine was signed in as Kevin, and it was hoovering up the entire recipient table. My first move was to check if Kevin was actually in the building. We have badge logs. I pulled up the entry system on a second monitor. Last badge scan for that ID was from July. Not tonight, not this week, July. I remember I said out loud, okay, what the hell? The floor was quiet enough that I could hear the ballast in the fluorescent over the copier ticking. There's always one that ticks. I remember focusing on it for a second because my brain wanted somewhere to go that wasn't the screen. I pulled up HR's directory. Kevin wasn't in it. Not under active employees, not under contractors. I searched the terminations list, which we have access to for exactly this kind of check, and there he was. Separated in July. Reason field just said, voluntary. His account should have been disabled the same day. It wasn't. It was sitting there, alive, and somebody had it. Now, protocol says the first thing you do is call your supervisor. My supervisor's name was Rita, and Rita did not answer her phone at 3 in the morning unless the building was actively on fire. I knew that. Everyone on our team knew that. I dialed her anyway, got voicemail, left a short message with a timestamp, and hung up. Then I called the on-call number for the security team. The line rang 8 times and went to a general mailbox. I left another message. My voice, when I played it back to myself later, sounded steady in a way that surprised me. The query counter on my screen kept climbing. It had been running for about 11 minutes by the time I noticed it. That's already a lot of rows. I did quick math in the corner of a notepad and got a number I did not want to see. I stopped waiting for permission. The way our system works, I have the ability to disable an account at the directory level. Anyone on the night team does. It's a break glass thing. You're supposed to document it after, but you don't have to ask first. I hovered over the disable option, and I had this stupid moment where I thought, what if Kevin's back and nobody told me? What if this is legit somehow? What if I lock out a real person doing a real thing, and I'm the idiot in the Monday morning meeting? Then I looked at the query rate again, 40 per second, steady, machine steady. I clicked disable. The session on the log froze, then it went red, then it dropped. The counter stopped moving. I checked the timestamps. From the first flag at 2:47 to the moment the connection died, 9 minutes and 11 seconds. Not great considering how long it took me to accept what I was seeing. Not bad either, all things considered. I sat back and my hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, just adrenaline. My body catching up to a decision I'd already made. The next hour was the work. I pulled the full query log and dumped it to a secure share. I counted rows. I logged the affected record IDs. I took screenshots of the session metadata, the source IP, the packet counts, the whole trail. I wrote a timeline in a plain text file because I wanted something clean I could hand to whoever showed up in the morning. Every few minutes I'd stop and check the dashboards to make sure nothing else was moving. Nothing was. Around 4, I finally got a call back from the security on call. A woman named Priya. Sounded like I'd woken her out of a dead sleep. I explained it in one sentence. She said, "Hold on," and I could hear her getting out of bed, a light switch, keys somewhere on a counter. 20 minutes later, she was on a laptop from her kitchen and we were on a bridge line together, pulling the same logs I'd already pulled. And she said, quiet, yeah, you did the right thing. Then she said, "Do you know whose machine it was?" I didn't yet. It took us another half hour to trace it. The source IP came back to a workstation on the second floor, not our team's floor. It was a machine that had been reassigned after Kevin left, wiped and given to a new hire. Except the wipe hadn't touched the saved credentials in a specific piece of software the caseworkers use for cross-referencing. Kevin's login was still cached there. Anyone who sat down at that machine and knew where to look had a live account with full read on the recipient table. They also had physical access, which meant someone got into the building. Priya said the FBI would want the badge logs. I pulled them anyway. There were 3 swipes on that floor between 11 and midnight, all belonging to a contract cleaning crew that had been rotating in for about 6 weeks. I flagged the times and left the analysis to people who do that for a living. I don't know who actually sat at that keyboard. That's the honest answer, and it's the part that stays with me. Someone knew Kevin's credentials were still valid. Someone knew which machine had the cache. Someone knew our building well enough to be there on a night when the 3rd floor motion sensors were down for maintenance, which they were, and I only found that out later. The count, in the end, was around 18,000 records. Full profiles, names, socials, banking, dependents, people who were on food assistance, disability, subsidized childcare, the ones who could least afford to have their information sold in a bundle on some forum. We had to notify all of them. Federal law. The letters went out about 6 weeks later. I never saw one in person, but I know what they said, because I helped draft the technical portion. The letters didn't mention that the account had been dead for 3 months, and nobody had bothered to kill it. That part stayed inside the building. The next Monday, I wrote a protocol. 2 pages. Mandatory account deactivation at the moment of separation, verified by a second person, with a same-day audit against the directory. Not something anyone had to remind HR about. Not something that waited on a Friday batch job. Same day, every time. The document sat with legal for 11 weeks before it got approved. When it finally came back, my language was almost intact. They'd only softened one line. Where I'd written, "There is no acceptable delay," they'd changed it to, "Delay should be minimized to the extent operationally feasible." I signed it anyway. I still work nights. Same desk, same 3 dashboards. The ballast over the copier still ticks. Nobody's ever going to replace it. Sometimes around 2:45, I catch myself watching the query counter for a second longer than I need to, waiting to see if the number climbs faster than a person should be able to type.